I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute, didn't he wear that same shirt yesterday? He didn't take a shower. In reality, it's the same day. I'm recording this yesterday. I wanted to, or actually earlier today, I wanted to talk about on the video that I posted yesterday, which I haven't actually posted yet because it still is yesterday. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, it's the same day as the recording of the last video. And I had wanted to talk about deductive reasoning, but I ended up rambling on about logic and knowledge by intuition again. And so, since I still had that fresh on my mind, I wanted to go ahead and record the second video on the same day. So, you're right, I haven't had a shower since the last video, but I'm wearing the same shirt because it's the same day. And actually, it's just like maybe an hour later. This is not a shirt, this is a jacket. This is a shirt. Anywho, so deductive reasoning. So before we talked about what was at the knowledge that was at the foundation. Now we're going to start building on that foundation. We can use some of the items in this foundation to acquire more knowledge, because some of the items that belong in the foundation are actually methods of acquiring more information. And deductive reasoning is one of those methods. We know the laws of logic through intuition, and using the laws of logic, we can deduce more information. Excuse me. So in deductive reasoning, basically, you have a minimum of two premises. Well, actually, you can have one premise, but I'm not going to talk about that special case. Usually you have two premises, and the conclusion follows necessarily from those premises. So if both premises are true, then it's impossible for the conclusion to be false. And I'm going to go through a few of these different kinds of syllogisms. I said syllogism for years and years and didn't realize I was mispronouncing it until just maybe a couple of years ago. But I still keep saying it syllogism. It's syllogism. Okay. So anyway, there's Modus Ponens and Modus Tollens, and I get these two mixed up all the time. One of them says, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. And I think that's Modus Tollens, but I'm not sure. And the other one is, if P then Q, P, therefore Q. There are two parts to it. This is called a hypothetical syllogism, I think. And they all have this if-then statement as the first statement. It doesn't really matter the order of the statement. But anyway, an if-then statement has two parts. There's the antecedent, that's the if part, and there's the consequent, the then part. So if P is the antecedent and then Q is the consequent. So there's two fallacies that you commit with these. If you say if P then Q, P therefore Q, that's a valid syllogism. But if you said if P then Q, Q therefore P, that's an invalid. That commits the fallacy of affirming the consequent. Another kind of fallacy is called denying the antecedent. So if you said if P then Q, not Q therefore not P, that's a valid syllogism. But if you said if P then Q, not P therefore not Q, that's an invalid syllogism. That commits the fallacy of denying the antecedent. So in a valid syllogism, you want to either deny the consequent or affirm the antecedent. So if you deny the antecedent or affirm the consequent, then you're committing a fallacy. So let me give you an example. If it's raining outside, then the ground will be wet. The ground is not wet, therefore it's not raining outside. Or you can do it this way. If it were raining outside, the ground would be wet. It is raining outside, therefore the ground must be wet. We think this way, or we use this kind of reasoning all the time without doing it explicitly. For example, if somebody said, "Hey Sam, did it rain last night?" And I said, "No, the ground's dry." They'd say, "Okay," and that'd be the end of the conversation. And you didn't hear any syllogism in that situation. I keep on stumbling over the word syllogism. Okay, so I didn't use a syllogism explicitly in that situation, but I was still reasoning deductively. My reasoning was, if it had rained last night, then the ground would be wet. But since the ground is not wet, therefore it didn't rain last night. So people reason deductively all day, every day, all the time, but we just don't do it explicitly. One of the things I like about Aristotle is he was one of the first people to kind of formalize logic, to give us like a tidy way of reasoning. And really, I think there would be a lot fewer miscommunications if people would reason explicitly. Usually what happens is somebody will just give you one premise, and there's a silent premise that you're just supposed to assume is true. Well, of course it didn't rain last night. The ground's dry. And that's all I say. Well, what I'm leaving out of there is that if it had rained last night, then the ground would be wet. I just assume you already know that, so I don't say it. I just simply say, no, it didn't rain last night. The ground is dry, or something like that. A lot of times people will give you their premises, but they won't give you their conclusion. You just kind of have to see that, if I said, if it had rained last night, then the ground would be wet, but the ground's dry. And that's all I say. And I just kind of leave it to you to draw the conclusion. A lot of misunderstandings can happen because sometimes people say, are you saying that it rained last night, or are you saying it didn't rain last night? So one of the advantages of knowing knowing these formal syllogisms is that it allows you to kind of look at argumentative paragraphs or argumentative statements or something and be able to figure out exactly what people are arguing. And if you can make all their premises explicit, then it's easier to find out, if they made some kind of mistake in reasoning, or they had a false premise or a false assumption or something like that, it's easier to figure out where the mistake happened. And it's also advantageous to learn these things because it allows you to avoid making mistakes. If you just think more carefully or think more explicitly about what your argument is, you can avoid making mistakes yourself. And it also helps you communicate more clearly. I realize I'm not a very clear communicator when it comes to speaking. I'm a little bit better when I'm writing. And I was much better 10 years ago than I am today. And logic helped me with that. So I gave you Modus Tollens and Modus Ponens. Don't remember which one's which. But let me give you some other syllogisms. There's the Disjunctive Syllogism. That's where you say either P or Q, not Q, therefore P. So basically this is just process of elimination. If you have a set of options, and it doesn't have to be two of them, it can be three or four, and at least one of those things is true, then that disjunct is true. So like, if P or Q or R or S or T, either P or Q or R or S or T, not P or Q or R or S, therefore T. It's a process of elimination. If you know that the right answer exists within a collection, and you can eliminate all but one of those options, then you know that the one left has to be the true one. That's just disjunctive reasoning. So, for example, either there are Oreos or there are chocolate chip cookies in the cookie jar. There are no Oreos in the cookie jar, therefore there are chocolate chip cookies in the cookie jar. That's probably not the best example. That's disjunctive. There's also the transitive property where you say, I used that before, if Jim is taller than Dan and Dan is taller than Bob, then Jim is taller than Bob. Another way is to say if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. That's the transitive property. And there are fallacies associated with these too. Let's see, there's also categorical syllogisms, like the one I used in one of my earlier videos. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's a categorical. And there's a bunch of other ones that uses some people or all people are this and some people are not that, and then you have to get into Venn diagrams or whatever to figure out what the conclusion is. And I don't really use those syllogisms a whole lot because I'm not the brightest person in the world, and so it's kind of hard for me to work that out in my head. And a lot of IQ tests have stuff like that on there, and they're very difficult for me to use because it requires a little bit more concentration. So I usually just stick to the Modus Ponens and Modus Tollens and stuff like that. So all of these laws of inference can be known by intuition. How do you know that if P, then Q, P, therefore Q? How do you know that that's a valid syllogism? We can just kind of see it. It's not the sort of thing you can prove. You just have to be able to rationally see it. And so that's why I say that that's knowledge by intuition. So deductive reasoning builds on knowledge by intuition. So let me say just a little bit more about deductive reasoning. I said before that if the premises are true and the conclusion follows from the premises, then the conclusion is true. It's impossible for the conclusion to be false if those two situations are met. So let me talk about the difference between a sound argument and a valid argument. A valid argument is where the logic follows, like the conclusion follows from the premises, but the premises may or may not be true. So if you have logical validity, that means that follows the form correctly. To be a sound argument, it has to at least be valid, but in addition to being valid, the premises also have to be true. So if you have a sound argument, then the premises are true and the conclusion follows from the premises, which means that the conclusion is true. So it's impossible to have a sound argument if the conclusion is not true. If the conclusion is true, then one of two things went wrong. Either one or more of the premises are false, or the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about deductive reasoning. Next time, I think I will either talk about inductive reasoning or I'll talk about sensory perception. And that's it for this video.